go.
Well, let's just kick it off. You know, you already mentioned a little bit that mental health is something that's incredibly important, if not for me. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about why you have chosen to really incorporate it into your music.
Of course. So when I was growing up, and I didn't realize I liked music all that much yet. I grew up on 90s country because that's what my parents listened to. And honestly, I still have a soft spot for that. I love that because that's what I knew. But I didn't start getting into alternative music and stuff like that until I was maybe 12 or 13. My first show ever, I was 14 or 15, and it was this rec center in my town, and I didn't know what it was. My friends were going, so I went, and it ended up being the band Texas in July, who's also from the central PA area. And it was just they're pouring their hearts out to these 30, 40 kids in this rec center, and I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. And then I just kind of fell in love with music then, and it did a lot for me because I had it's weird because my upbringing was very normal. Normally when you think of people that have mental health issues or something, they struggle with something like that, it's oh man, they must have came from a bad home or something like that, or something traumatic happened to them. But I was just I had a very loving, supporting family. We didn't go hungry, everything was okay. And then I couldn't figure out when I was a teenager why I didn't want to be around anymore, and I hid that from them for a long time. And I just kind of dove into music as my therapy for that, and it did a lot for me, and especially if not for me's first full-length record, Eulogy. I was going through a rough time when I wrote that record, and a lot of it is about just me wanting to kill myself, and it was me writing exactly what I was feeling in that moment, whether it was good or bad, and trying to be really raw with it. And I just feel getting into music when I did really did a lot for me as far as keeping me here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so you've had that experience of music really, saving your life in a way.
Yeah. And it's crazy because I always like to, when I talk about this kind of thing, I like to bring up the fact that nothing crazy happened to me. I just have these problems because it's important to acknowledge the fact that none of this is our fault. This could happen to anybody, but it's just a matter of how you get yourself through it and what you can find to get yourself through it, who you reach out to, all that kind of stuff.
Sort of being a recipient of that kind of energy from the scene, and now being somebody who is in the scene, on the stages, doing the things. What kind of things are you really wanting to communicate to people now that you have sort of that platform as well as that lived experience? That
is a really good question. And one of the things that I always try to tell myself is I never want somebody to feel I'm giving the impression that I'm too good for somebody, or don't want to interact with them or something like that, because I remember being that kid at 12 years old or whatever, and I'm watching this band give it their all on stage, playing to nobody sometimes, but they're still giving me everything they got. And if I can do that for somebody, that is the coolest thing in the world to me. So I always want to be that, because that's what I grew up idolizing. And it's really insane to me when I get to hear people tell me that my music or the lyrics or anything like that touched them, or and a lot of the people do use the word saved their life, and it's crazy to think that I could have that impact on somebody, because I remember being that kid, like I said. So it means the world to me, and I hope no matter what traumatic thing or that somebody's going through, if I could pull somebody out of that, if I could use a little bit of my pain to pull somebody out of that, that means the world to me.
So you shared a little bit about how you did that with Eulogy, your debut record, and how that came from a really dark place, but you're kind of in this new season of music as a band.
Yeah.
So I'd love for you to share a little bit about Broken Throne and kind of where that is coming from right now.
That one's an interesting one. That was one I wanted to write about for a long time, but I didn't know the way to approach it. And it deals with religious trauma and somewhat doubting everything that you grew up believing in. Because I was raised heavily in the church, and it did a lot for me growing up, and I still carry a lot of that with me. But when I was a teenager, especially, I started to see things in the church that I didn't agree with, and I didn't necessarily want to follow. Like one of my earliest memories from youth group is like I'm sitting in a pew with like one of the youth leaders, and I think we were at like a nursing home. We went to like a nursing home's church service or something like that, and we're sitting there waiting for the service to start, and she leans over to me and she's like, she said, do you hear, she said something like, did you hear that they're letting gay people be like members of some churches now, or something like that? And I just remember thinking, even then at like 11 or 12 years old, I'm like, what's wrong with you? Like, why would you say that to like this kid, you know, just sitting here? But yeah, I come from a very religious family, and the Jesus that I grew up learning about had no room in his hate for heart, or had no room in his heart for hate. I screwed that up. Good. But so when I see stuff like that from the church, especially, it rubs me the wrong way, and it makes me not really want to associate with the church. Like I still, I don't know, like I said, I still carry a lot of that with me today. I still believe in everything that Jesus taught as far as compassion and love and acceptance of others, lifting each other up. Because that's ultimately what this life is all about to me. But there's a lot of stuff that I saw growing up that I don't want to associate with anymore. And that's kind of what Broken Throne is about. In a nutshell, I guess.
Yeah, man. First of all, religious trauma kids represent.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, I got you. I would be curious to hear sort of like, as you've come through that journey of being like, okay, here's what I'm going to keep and here's what I'm going to sort of shed. What has been helpful for you? Because I feel like that's a really hard process for a lot of people to walk through that isn't talked about a lot.
Yeah.
So what has helped you in the process of kind of moving beyond where you came from into something that you do feel is like an authentic, true belief that's your own?
Of course, yeah. I think the things that I just keep with me the most is like the things that Jesus actually taught and what he preached and stuff like that, as far as like we're not put on this earth to condemn others. We're put on this earth to lift each other up, and like, you know, Jesus, he fed the poor, you know, he clothed the needy, he fed the hungry, like, and it's just stuff that like you see a lot of people actively rallying against nowadays, especially in the church. And I'm just like, this is it's so like one of the lines from from Broken Throne, I say, what do I say in the second verse? There's no sign of life in this starlit sky. And that was like a reference to the stars over Judea the night Jesus was born. And what I was trying to say in that line basically is like, there's no sign of life, as in like, maybe we could recite the scriptures, but we kind of lost the meaning behind them. Like, it's just kind of empty words now to a lot of people, and we're not really helping people the way that we should. There's like a lot of references in that song just to stuff like that. And like the whole painted glass memories line is literally just about the massive stained glass windows in the church that I grew up in. It just really stuck with me for some reason.
No, the lyrics are gorgeous, first of all.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, but I love what you're sort of saying about, again, what has been actually like helpful to you to retain, and what you actually like have seen as being like, no, this is a true character. And it's interesting because some of what you're like picking out as sort of the true character of the Jesus who you know is some of the same stuff that you said about the scene. So I'd love to know sort of where you see that playing out, and if the community that, if not for me, creates at concerts. Like, what are some of the core characteristics that you feel like have been shared between now the belief system you've built and what you want to build with your music? Yeah,
at the end of the day, I just want to lift people up with it. And it's so cool to see, because I feel like we see that on a lot of our shows. Like, we see these huge groups of people that didn't know each other before our shows that are now like good friends because they met in our mosh pit or something like that. And it's just like that community is so important, because that's ultimately one of the things that, you know, drew me here in the first place. That's one of the things that saved me, is because I felt so alone and I did not understand why. And so when I found this outlet and I found other people that feel the same way that I did, it just made me realize that, you know, like maybe I'm semi-normal after all, I guess, you know? And So when we get to, go out and do these tours and we meet these people that, they'll say things, like you saved my life and all that kind of stuff. It's such a full circle moment for me. And yeah, it just, I don't know. It's crazy. It means the world to me.
If you could sort of like say one thing to somebody who is in that place of feeling really alone right now, who still is like maybe on the fringes of the scene and who maybe is in a place of religious trauma and hasn't moved beyond it yet, like what is sort of like one thing that you would want to communicate to them?
Yeah, I think the ultimate thing, which I sort of touched on a little bit earlier, is just that like, whatever you're feeling, whether you went through something that was crazy, or you're dealing with something crazy, or maybe necessarily nothing happened at all, but you have these feelings anyway, like it's not your fault. Like I feel like a lot of people put the blame on themselves, or they're kind of embarrassed to talk about these kind of things. But you kind of need to talk about them. You kind of need to put that out there. And sometimes just putting it out there alone helps. But when you do put that stuff out there, sometimes you meet people that are going through the same things as you are. And ultimately that community, like some people can find, solace and solidarity, but a lot of people can't. Like some people just need that shoulder to cry on sometime, or that friend to talk to. So like, I feel like a lot of people have a lot more people in their life that care about them than they think they do. So just don't be afraid to reach out to people. That's my ultimate advice. Like this is not your fault. Talk about it, because just sitting in there and dwelling on it like I did for years is not helpful.
That's so aligned with sort of everything we try and create too.
Yeah.
Like the spaces we try and create. Just kind of, in closing, I'd love for you to share like what's on the horizon for you, like in terms of like new music, in terms of like shows, like what can we expect?
Sure, yeah. So we have a tour that we're on right now. Welcome to Rockville was the first date, actually, which is sick. But that's with Colorblind and Wind Waker. Should be really fun. We'll be out for the next 30 days. We have a summer tour to get us to Incarceration Festival, which I'm really excited about. That's with Memphis, Mayfire, and Caskets. And then in the meantime, you could expect a lot more new music and maybe some crazy features on some songs coming out soon, which we're really stoked about.
Incredible. Well, I think that's what we need. I thank you so much for just like your courage and vulnerability and sharing it with that. Honestly, I feel like again we are just incredibly aligned in what we value in the scene. And
I love that. My pleasure.
And like making an accepting space for people.
Of course, that's what it's all about.
Crawling down on the